This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Grand Dawn and Great Rising, Cleveland, and the rest of planet Earth. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest this morning is Dr. Katrina Hazzard-Donald. She is one of the nation's leading dance researchers. She's an author, lecturer, and professor, and she's the author of 2 scholarly books and numerous articles on African American dance and culture, and 1 book of poetry. She's in wide demand as a guest speaker at universities and colleges around the world. She delivered the 2020 Keynote address at Duke University's Collegium for African Diaspora Dance Symposium, in which she encouraged young researchers to do more than write about dance. She challenged them to reexamine the scholarly paradigms that they use when researching dance and to submerge themselves in the dance life and culture of their subjects and allow that material and experience to positively influence the direction of their research. Her first book, Jukin, The Rise of Social Dance Formations in African American Culture, won the De La Torre Bueno Special Citation for Dance Research. Her second book, Mojo Working, The Old African American Hoodoo System, explores and sets forth a new theory about the ring shout, an Ogun, Olorisha, or initiate to Ogun in the New World Yoruba Lukumi tradition. Dr. Hazzard interviewed and worked with several traditional African American hoodoo workers for her second book. In addition to the books, she's the author of a number of articles in journals, anthologies, and encyclopedias that explore the meaning, function, and nature of African American dance. She's the recipient of an American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship, a Rockefeller Postdoctoral Fellowship at Brown University, and the 1999 Oni Award from the International Black Women's Congress. Quite a bit there, quite a bit more that I could share, but I'm going to end it right there and let her speak for herself. Welcome to Open Door, Dr. Katrina Hazzard.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm really happy to have you on today, and I will be transparent and let everyone know that I became aware of you due to a good friend of mine by the name of Robert Allen. He will probably listen to this show, so I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge his role in connecting us. And as we have had a conversation before, doing this interview, I learned quite a bit about you, and I'm really excited and anxious. And I'm going to tell the folks that are listening right now, 54 minutes and 30 seconds will not be enough. So we're going to have to reconnect again and perhaps share you on some other platforms that I have, including my YouTube channel, which you can go to on YouTube. Just look up Vince Robinson, look up my videos, and among other things, you'll be able to hear and listen to this interview. So again, welcome to the program. Let's start. I want to give you a really good opportunity to talk about your books, but as we talked, you have a very rich history in life here in Cleveland, and you were connected to some folks who people need to know about. So let's start by just talking about your growing up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay. Well, I grew up right down on the Lower East Side. The neighborhood used to be called the Roaring Third because it was the third police district, and it had a terrible reputation back in the 30s. I grew up on 35th Street between Cedar and Central Avenue, and I am an East Tech graduate. I'm a scarab. I just, grew up in a community that was primarily Southern. Most of the people, especially all the adults, had come from Alabama. So I felt like I was growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, in Cleveland. I'm still very Southern. And even though I was born and reared in the North, I consider myself a Southerner culturally. I went to Central Middle School, junior high school, right there on 40th Street between Cedar and Central. And then went off. And then when I came back, I was an East Tech student and I was an East Tech graduate. And from there, two of the teachers at East Tech, and some of the best teachers in the world are in the Cleveland public school system. They really, really care about the students. I had some teachers that saved my life. They were just wonderful human beings. And if it were not for them, I would not be who I am today, because the chemistry teacher literally put me in her car, drove me to the Wilberforce campus, and put me out. Kissed me and said, good luck. I had not filled out an application. I'd never taken the SAT or the ACT. Didn't even know what those were. Wilberforce filled out my application, finished it right there on the spot, gave me financial aid on the spot, and put me in a dorm room, enabled me to graduate from college. And it was a Wilberforce professor that sent me to Cornell. Then my life changed significantly.
So let me ask you, while at Wilberforce, what did you study?
I entered Wilberforce as an English major. I wanted to write. I ended up getting a degree in social psychology, and it was basically a sociology-based degree with a minor in English. And so because of the times, I was in college in the 60s. In fact, sociology enrollment increased 11-fold during that period of time because, it was a very active period of time in America. There was a lot of activism in Cleveland. In fact, Cleveland has historically been an activist city because of the strong union background there. And so when I got to Wilberforce, I ended up as an English major, switched into sociology, eventually graduated, went off to Cornell. But while I was there, I became student council president my senior year. I was kind of drafted by a group of students, and I ran and I won. I had no intention at all of doing anything like that, but I ended up as student council president. And that's what made me decide I was not going into politics. I was not going to get a political science degree. I don't think I'm cut out for it.
Well, let me pause. Let me pause right there and ask you, what did they see in you that made them think that you would be the best person to be the president?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think it was because of the times. It was 1967, and of course, the term Black Power had just been introduced to the public in 1966. And I was probably an activist. I was one of those students that was an activist student, and that's probably why. I had gone to work in the Mississippi Delta. I'd taken a year off from college and gone down on a co-op program. And instead of staying a semester, I stayed the whole school year. So I spent a year in the Mississippi Delta working for Delta Ministry. And that just increased my militance and just increased my vision. So that by the time I got back to Cornell, I was really ready for the revolution. And that may have had something to do with it.
Okay. Well, speaking of the revolution, and I don't want to get ahead of the story, but I have to bring this up right now. You have a connection to the Glenville Shootout. Would you care to share with us what that was?
Well, I eventually ended up married to one of the co-defendants. We had met back in 1966, before we had turned 18. We were still 17 years old. And he was a writer, and I wrote. We both wrote poetry and short stories. And we kind of just fell in love as a result of that. That's what attracted us to each other. In fact, we met in a shop, a novelty shop that was owned by a former member of the Morris Science Temple. And a friend of mine took me up there to read my poetry, and that's when we met and literally just fell in love as teenagers. Of course, I ended up going off to Wilberforce, and he ended up joining the Black Nationalist group with Ahmed Evans. And, of course, a year later, in 1968, that shootout occurred. I was in the Mississippi Delta, working for Delta Ministry at the time, and I was stationed in Cleveland, Mississippi, of all places. And my supervisor said to me that morning, he said, "Hey, Katrina, see, there was a shootout in Cleveland." Well, I was in Greenville, Mississippi at the time. I'd come to pick up my paycheck, and I said, "No, there was no shootout in Cleveland. I just left Cleveland." I'm thinking Cleveland, Mississippi. He's talking about Cleveland, Ohio. And I said, "Oh, no, there's nothing happening in Cleveland. I just left. This morning, everything was fine." And he said, "No, I'm talking about your hometown, Cleveland." He said, "They had a shootout up there, some Black nationalists." And I said, "Oh, yeah, that's probably Harwell Jones and those folks. That's probably, that couldn't be any of the people I know there. They wouldn't do anything like that." And I picked up the newspaper, the Delta Democratic Times, and there was Lathan Donald on the front cover, laying in a pool of his own blood. And I said, oh my God, it is some people that I know. Well, he gets tried, sentenced. 3 of them are sentenced as juveniles because they're so young. If he had been tried the year of the shootout, he would have been tried as a juvenile. But he was in a body cast for a year, and then they took him to trial. He'd already turned 18, so he was tried as an adult. But they were kids. They were 17. The youngest one was 15. And what happened is I ended up writing him in prison as a result of someone else. At Cornell, there was a prison project program. And I said to someone, I know somebody that's in prison. Let me see if I can find them, somebody who went there as a result of political activity. And around 1977, about 1977, somewhere in there, we ended up writing each other again after 10 years. And continued to write each other. And he was eventually released from prison after 26 years. And the next thing we knew is we were falling in love again, and we ended up getting married. He had his parole transferred here to Philadelphia, and we lived here happily for 15 years, and then he passed away. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You never know what life has in store for you. You meet somebody when you're a kid, and then you come back, 35 years later and end up married to him.
Yes.
Nobody could have told me that would happen.
Right. That's amazing, and when you think about the times, we live in text messages and emails and, things are so immediate. But, I'm just looking back and thinking what it would have been like for him to be where he was and to receive a letter from you and to be energized by it. And then for him to send it back to you, and then you receive that letter and you have this connection through words, and, you're a PhD. So you have made a living from your words, but you and he had that intimate connection and were able to reconnect later in life and enjoy the time that you had together.
So funny is that when he wrote me the letter, he signed it the same way he signed a letter to me that he wrote to me when I was 17, and I had gone to Kentucky to visit family. And while I was in Kentucky that summer, we wrote each other back and forth. And he would always sign the letters, endure. And he would always open the letters with salam, sister. And so when he wrote me 10 years later, he opened the letter, salam, sister. And I thought, oh, wow. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Life is an interesting thing to be involved in.
It is, and there's only a couple of degrees of separation. They used to say 6, but I say that's down the road.
True.
That's in the past, not anymore. So you went to Wilberforce, and then you ended up at Cornell, and you were doing what there?
I got into a program called Social Organization and Change, which was in the sociology department. And even though I was in the sociology department, I was not completely trained as a mainstream sociologist because I had 2 areas outside of sociology: European intellectual history and dance, drama, and theater history. So even though I am a sociologist of sorts, I don't crunch the numbers. I work ethnographically, and I write primarily about cultural issues. So there.
Okay, so you say you write primarily about social issues.
Well, cultural issues and social issues, but primarily I write about culture, the movement and the action of culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what led to your first book?
Well, I had to do a dissertation, of course, if I was going to get the doctorate. And all that is training on how to write a book. And I thought for a long time about what I would do. And I thought about, just going to the computer data, pulling a bunch of it out and writing up a study of voting behavior. It would have taken me a year, and I would have got the degree, and I wouldn't have known anything. And I did what my dissertation advisor told me to do. He said, you can go to the computer and pull out the data, and you'll have your degree in a year, but you won't know anything. He said, or you can suffer, but you will learn more and more about more and more. And when you leave here, you will be a walking encyclopedia. It's your choice. Well, I chose the latter, and I ended up staying there, getting a master's and a doctorate. running a dorm to put myself through. And it took me some time to figure out what I wanted to write about. I knew I wanted to write something about dance, but I wasn't sure what direction to take. And since there had been almost no studies in sociology of dance, very, very few, I had almost no one to turn to. So I had to kind of break ground on my own. And I thought about this thing. I couldn't interview every bar or club owner in Cleveland. And I thought, well, I need to do something theoretical. My dissertation chairman said to me, he said, Katrina, can you outline the forms that these things appear in for me? And that's all he said. The whole dissertation magically appeared in my head at that point. And I thought, my God, write about juke houses, honky-tonks, and after-hours joints, because those are the traditional folk arenas in which the dance has emerged. And I began to examine these institutions and look at them. And I started to look at them with a different eye. I discarded all of the negative comments I'd heard about these places growing up. Saying, oh, you know, juke houses, honky-tonks, that's after-hours joint. Those are bad places. You don't want to be caught in those places. But those are the places in which the culture and the music have thrived. That's the first level of creation for the culture. And so I began to look at them and ask myself a series of questions. What are these things? Do they have derivative forms? How did they originate? Is there an African precursor? How can I come to grips with this phenomena? And it magically came to me that our people began to dance the minute we got off the boat. It was never taken out of us. And we had those informal dance arenas under slavery. And so I had to go back. I started with the parliamentary papers, and I went through those. I read the diary of Alexander Falconbridge. He was a surgeon on board the famous slave ship Brooks, and the surgeons keep the best accounts because they have the least vested interest in the institution of slavery. They can get jobs anyway. They don't have to work on slave ships, and they have no real vested interest in maintaining slavery one way or another. So their work does not obscure the truth as often as the diaries of, say, the captains or the traders. And so I went to these diaries and I found numerous references to dance. And I thought, wow, these people were dancing on board the slave ship. And I used that as my first chapter, Dancing Under the Lash. Then I began to examine, how did dance emerge on the plantation? What can I go to? And so I went to plantation management manuals. I was able to find 12 of those. And in there, these are manuals that are written out by absentee planters. So someone will say, come from England. They'll set up a plantation, say a tobacco plantation or a cotton plantation. They will write out detailed instructions for their overseers. And then they'll leave and go back to England and just collect their money. So I got my hands on these management manuals. And in each and every one of them, I found references to dancing the slaves or dancing the Negroes. And that gave me the beginnings of my second chapter, Dancing Under the Lash. But what was so interesting about the way that I was working is as I went through these plantation management manuals, I uncovered a lot of other information that I was not looking for. For example, it gave me the answer to why do we, especially Black women, have such problems and hang-ups over the issue of hair. We've got all kinds of beliefs and processes and folkloric statements about hair. We got good hair, we got bad hair, we got nappy hair, we got straight hair, we have all kind of mythology about hair. We have statements about the kitchen and the BB shots, and we just got this whole hair thing going on. We got weaves and we got wigs and we got corn, we got this hair thing. So as I went through these plantation management manuals, it gave me an answer that explained how we relate to hair and why we do it as such. For in every plantation management manual I examined, every single one of them, there were detailed instructions on cutting the negresses and the mulattresses' hair twice per year. And in many places, many cities, New Orleans, Richmond, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, Lexington, Kentucky, and I don't remember the rest of the city records I went through, I found laws made that made it illegal for any woman of African heritage, whether she was enslaved or free, It was against the law for her to grow her hair below the top of her earlobes. And black women's hair was forcibly cut twice a year. So that if you saw a black woman who had any length of hair, it meant one of two things. She was either a free woman or she was the mistress of a powerful white man that you didn't want to mess with, because she could do what she wanted to with our hair. Our hair hang-up comes from those days when we forcibly cut our hair, when our hair was forcibly cut. So I asked my grandmother one day, Mama, did you know any people that were slaves? And she said, of course, all of my mother's friends had been slaves. Almost all the adults I knew who were over 30 had been slaves. And I said, tell me about one of them. She told me about her mother's best friend, who was a black woman who could pass for white. She was still working for the children of her former masters. They had her paying manumission fees because she had to return a certain amount of her weekly pay back to that family, paying for herself to be freed. Every 6 months, my grandmother told me this woman would come to her house and sit at the kitchen table and cry her eyes out because her employers, who were her former master's children, would force her to cut her hair twice a year. They were still doing it. That's what I learned by looking for dance references, by going through plantation management manuals. That's a complete aside. It had nothing to do with what I was researching, but enabled me to later to write a piece on hair. So there's that.
You know, it's interesting when you look at the spiritual implications of dance. And I know we're going to talk about the ring shot, but as I'm listening to you describe what you wrote about, can you talk about the spiritual implications of dance in light of the fact that you have a relationship to African spiritual practices?
Oh, yes. African religions are danced religions. Let me say that. That's one of the reasons why we dance in church today. And we'll get up and cut that holy step. We dance to worship God. It's traditional in all of West Africa, West and Central West Africa, and in East Africa too. But where our ancestors come from in West and Central West Africa, you dance to worship God. You dance to worship the aspects of God. In fact, in many of the traditional religions, and I know the Yoruba religion better than the others, in the Yoruba religion, there is a dance step for every aspect of God. So the aspect of God that controls the ocean, for example, the sea, Yemoja, she's called in Brazil, Yemanya. There's a specific dance step that Yemanya does, which looks exactly like the ring shout. It's a counterclockwise dance. Every aspect of God has his sacred step. Shango has a step. Ogun has a step. Elegba has a step. Oshun has a step. They all have their particular dance steps and dance rhythms and particular sets of songs. So you dance to show reverence through Shango to Olodumare, the name of God.
To extend the conversation about that, and we talked about this on yesterday, and I just want to bring this out in this conversation. When people were captured and brought to America, they brought their whole self with them. And I'm just imagining that those things that they did in terms of their spiritual practices, they continued to do, but they were discouraged from doing those kinds of things because I think those who were quote unquote in power or in control realized that their humanity, their divinity was couched and entrenched in those things. And so to disconnect them from the power that they had through their spiritual practices, they said, you can't write, you can't read, you can't dance. And I'm just thinking about Baptist churches because I grew up in the Baptist church and I can't remember any time in the time that I was growing up that I walked into a Baptist church and I saw any dancing. You didn't really have too much clapping. There wasn't a whole lot of foot patting. It was kind of a somber situation. And I'm just thinking about how this was something that was kind of bred intentionally into the way we worship to disconnect us from our power.
I have to think about that one. Because that could very well be One of the things I discovered when I was going through the slave literature, and I did go through all 55 volumes of the Warwick slave narratives. One of the things I noticed is that many slave masters would allow their slaves to dance as a reward for good work. Yeah, so if slaves wanted to have a dance, so they say, Master, us want to have a dance on Saturday night, and he says, well, y'all got to clear the lower 40 first. If you can't get the lower 40 cleared, I ain't going to let you have no party now. And so there was oftentimes a bargaining that occurred, and slaves would police each other in the fields. They'd say, oh, man, listen, you ain't picking that cotton fast enough. If we don't get this clear, we ain't going to be able to have no dance. We ain't going to be able to have no party. You want to see your wife. You ain't seen her for 6 months, man. She don't have a plantation. And we don't get this work done, we ain't going to be able to do that. You better get to work and let somebody come over here and help you. Slaves policed and supported each other in the fields as a result of that. And I found quotations and found documented evidence of that, and lots of it.
Well,
it is there.
I'm having another flashback because I grew up in a military family, and when we went to church on the base, we went to the base chapel, and of course they had different denominations. So one Sunday it would be a Lutheran service, another Sunday it would be Episcopalian, another Sunday it would be Baptist. But it was very tightly controlled. It wasn't long, so when you went to church services on base, you weren't there all day. It was like an hour and 15 minutes. You're in and out. But again, no drums. No bass guitars, it was just kind of a somber service. And I was talking about that just to think about the fact that they took away our drums. They took away the ways that we could praise the Lord or whatever we were choosing to praise. They took those things away from us because they knew that there was some type of power in it. Yeah, so
the reason that drum, the drum is outlawed here in 1739, and it takes effect in 1740. But it's precipitated by an event that starts in the Congo in the late 1600s. A woman is born, a young child is born, who's a female. She's a lesser noble in the old Congo royal family of the old Congo kingdom. And by the time she's born, the Congo has split. In 1488, one of the lesser noblemen, one of the princes in the Congo kingdom, converts to Catholicism. In 1488. Okay, now this is 4 years before Columbus even sails. So there is no transatlantic slave trade. There is no colonial pressure at this time. They convert to Catholicism and establish a Congolese Catholic Church in the Congo. And you can go and buy the Congolese Mass sung in the Congolese language. It's called Misaluba. And there's an album that records the whole thing, and I have a copy of it. And so these people form this Catholic Church. This woman is born, and when she's 17 or so, she falls into a deep sleep, and everyone thinks she's dead. And when they go to have the second burial, which is that burial they do a week after the person has died, she, instead of, staying dead, she rises up and comes back to life. And when she comes back, she says that she is the reincarnated spirit of St. Anthony of Padua, which at the time was the most revered saint in all of Catholicism. And she takes the Salve Regina, a famous Catholic prayer, and turns it into the Salve Antonia. Creates this prayer, this Congolese prayer, and they establish this Congolese Catholic Church. She has decided that she wants to reunite the old Congo kingdom, and she raises an army and leads this army into battle. She's about 18 at the time, 17 or 18. She loses. The Congolese take her and burn her at the stake. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
A teenage girl leading an army into victory who's later on burned at the stake?
Mm-hmm.
Sound familiar?
Yes.
In France, she's called Saint Joan of Arc. In the Congo, she's called Kimpa Vida. 720 of her warriors are picked up in the year of 1725, and they are sent to Charleston, South Carolina, on board a slave ship. They are war-seasoned veterans who have fought in the old Congo Wars. They take up arms and lead the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, and many of them escape into Spanish territory in Florida, where they are hailed as heroes. But the people in the North pass a law to outlaw the drum because they use the drum to call the Congolese soldiers to the battle. That's what causes the drum to be outlawed in 1739.
Wow.
And there's a long story. I had to get it all in.
Yes. Well, I'm appreciative for that. So let's talk.
And if anybody wants to read about it, they should get John Thornton's book. It's a short book. It's only about 95 pages long. It's called The Congolese St. Anthony, Kimpa Vida Dona Beatrice. That's the title. The Congolese St. Anthony. His name is John Thornton, the author.
So I want to talk about mojo working, but I'm reflecting on what we discussed yesterday about how certain deities became known as something else.
Okay.
So let's talk about mojo working. What inspired you to create that work?
Well, I got inspired by a couple of sources. That was to some extent my revenge book. I probably shouldn't call it that. I was motivated deeply by what I was seeing online. And I was seeing a lot of fabrication and misinformation about a tradition that I had actually grown up in. My mother actually practiced it. She had high John the Conqueror roots pent inside of her brassiere. She had money drawing oil. And my great-grandfather's oldest sister, Aunt New, was actually a hoodoo worker. And I talk about her in the book. She dies in 1972 when she's 102 years old, and I'm 24. So I got inspired by seeing a lot of misinformation on the internet, especially at a website called luckymojo.com. The thing that really did it for me was when I saw the explanation of something on that site called a nation sack. Nation, like nation. A nation sack. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. I said, oh my God, somebody's got to write something to straighten all this stuff out. People being led down this. This is not what this stuff is. So I began to think about this thing. And I said, this woman's got this stuff all wrong. There was an entire complete system underground that had nothing to do with this stuff. Maybe you ought to write it up, Katrina. And so I sat down and began to write. I wanted to challenge what was out there and show how incorrect it was and really turn people on to the real sources. This whole nation sack, one of the things I had to do when I was writing this was to rethink language. One of the things I noticed is as I was going through many old manuscripts and articles written back in the 1800s, is oftentimes the interviewer, when they are interviewing a Black person, and this also happened in the slave narratives extensively, the interviewer will correct the English of the Black person who's speaking, thinking that they are mispronouncing a word, and they're not mispronouncing a word. Let me give you an example. I read an article written in 1894, the Bose magazine, in which a woman who once owned slaves describes the slave children playing a game in the front yard. The game she called Mr. Cooler, Cooler, Mr. Cooler. She said these slave children, they went and they got a brush broom, a broom that's made out of a bunch of bushes. They would tie it together and attach it around their waist and let it hang down their butts like it was a tail. And they would drag that tail across the front yard singing, Mr. Cooler, Mr. Cooler, Mr. Cooler, Mr. Cooler. So now these kids have tied a broom on their butts, have it dragging like a tail, singing Mr. Cooler. That didn't make any sense to me as a person who comes from core Black culture. I thought, first of all, I'm well educated and I do not pronounce my final consonants. Why would a slave child pronounce its final consonant? A slave child would never have said Mr. Cooler. Even educated black folks today don't pronounce that hard R. I would never have said Mr. Cooler. My daddy wouldn't have said Mr. Cooler. So something said, Katrina, pronounce that term as your great-grandfather would have said it. He would have said Mr. Cooler. That's when it dawned on me. The children were playing a game called Mr. Cooter. And if you know anything about African-American traditional core culture, you know that the Cooter has three manifestations in African-American culture. Number one, he's a mountain lion. It's the mispronunciation of the term cougar. So if somebody says a cougar was chasing me in the woods, you know they're talking about a mountain lion. If they say, come on, we're going cougar hunting, you know they're going hunting for turtles, because the land terrapin is also called a cougar, especially in Florida among black folks. The third manifestation of the cougar is he's a ghost like the boogeyman, and he comes and he gets bad children. So when a child disobeys, you say, you better stop doing it or the cougar going to get you tonight. So the children were playing Mr. Cooter. They were dragging a tail. Everybody knows that the Cooter drags his tail in the water. Gator drags his tail in the water. Cooter drags his tail in the sand. And the song goes, Cooter drags his tail in the sand. Gator drags his tail in the water. When the mighty wolf starts dragging his tail, he done stole somebody's daughter. The kids were playing Mr. Cooter, an old slave game that references the boogeyman coming to get the children if they disobey. The white woman corrected their English and said, Mr. Cooler. And if you don't know African-American culture, you would think that the children were actually singing Mr. Cooler. I had to do that as I went through old slave manuscripts. I had to recorrect the corrected English. That's what makes that kind of research difficult, because if you don't know the old pronunciations, you can't do that work. I was blessed. I was raised by a man whose parents had been slaves until they were 17 years old, and I knew all the old pronunciation patterns. That's how I was able to do it.
You know, that really underscores the importance of us staying connected to those who come before us, particularly in light of the fact that we come from an oral tradition and things were passed down verbally from generation to generation. So that's very powerful. Your book deals with hoodoo, and there's a relationship between hoodoo, voodoo, and voodoo. Could you explain what that is?
Okay. Vodun is the religion as it comes out of Dahomey, which of course is called Benin today. It's a natural religion. It worships one God and only one God. And it has what the Catholics call saints. They call them Orisha. In the Congo, they call them Kisi. And among the Akan, they're called Abosan. Everybody's got them. We call them saints. Christians call them saints. The thing with hoodoo is that hoodoo is the North American variant on that. Okay? It's not Vodun, it's not voodoo, but it is a derivation of the same African ethnic religions that produces voodoo, lukumi, santeria, gaga, all of those traditional religion practices that you see throughout the Caribbean and South America and Central America. They all come out of this Central West African base. And the practices are highly identifiable because people are still doing them today. I can go to Nigeria and sing the songs. I don't understand a word that I'm saying, but I can sing them because I've learned them from memory. And they're so shocked that we know them. It's like, wow, you don't speak Yoruba, but you can sing the Yoruba songs. So they all have traditional dances that go with the saint. They have a traditional song that goes with the saint. So I began to look for something similar in our experience. I had to ask the question, well, why are we different here in North America? We have not sustained any of these religions. And then I thought, oh, but yes, we have. It's called hoodoo. And let me tell you, the work was not easy to do because you cannot go around and ask where you can find a hoodoo worker. They'll tell you, oh, no, nothing about that. No. So I had to figure out how to find the real root workers, not those people who are fabricating it and selling it to make money, but the real folks that do the real work, that go out and dig their own roots or have diggers that work for them, that use the old recipes, the old formulas. Let me tell you how you find those people. Okay, I didn't want to have to go down to Opelousas, Louisiana and talk to the treaters, and they are difficult to find if you don't know how to ask for them. These informal doctors have been down there practicing for the last 400 years undercover. And they're called treaters, and they tie the sacred healing knots. And they tie one knot that has every bone and nerve in the human body. In this knot they tie. It replicates every bone in the human body. And they use this knot for healing. Anyway, so I began to look at hoodoo, and I began to ask a series of questions. Like, all these other derived African religions have a sacred dance. Well, did hoodoo ever have a sacred dance? Was it ever fully practiced? I mean, where do I begin to find this stuff? I had to figure out the right questions to ask. When you're looking for a real root worker, you don't ask for one. You have to ask a different question. And when you ask the right question, all the root workers will stand up. I had an article.
What was the question? I have to ask. What was the question?
This is the question.
Okay.
You don't ask, where can I find somebody that can work some hoodoo on somebody or put some roots on somebody? Say, no, never don't know. This is what you have to ask. You have to say this. You say, listen, I got a close friend or a family member, whichever one you want to use, and somebody done put some roots on them. I need to find me somebody that could take this roots off my husband, take the root. And then they'll appear. They say, well, I can do that. You'd be surprised at how many people will appear when you ask the question that way. But you must ask it in a fundamentalist church. And when you ask that question in a fundamentalist church, you'd be surprised at how many people will show up who can work roots. But you got to ask that question. You cannot go in asking for a root worker. You have to say, I got somebody that put something on, I need some help taking it off. That's when you get the information. I was able to locate Brother Gregory. Brother Gregory is the famous Dr. Buzzard's great-grandson, and he is really his great-grandson. His mother was Dr. Buzzard's granddaughter, or his grandmother was Dr. Buzzard's daughter, And he's down on St. Helena Island where Dr. Buzzard worked, still doing the work. And every time you go there are cars in his front yard with license plates from as far away as Massachusetts and Texas. People coming there to see him on St. Helena Island because he's the grandson of Dr. Buzzard, the famous original hoodoo man, Dr. Buzzard. His name was Stephanie Robinson. And Brother Gregory on St. Helena Island is his great-grandson. And he is still doing it the old way, even though he has started recently to use some fabricated supplies. But he still does have diggers. And then I located Miss Mary, and I named the people in the glossary of the book, the root workers that I had a chance to work with and meet. Papa Say, a black Jewish hoodoo man from New Orleans. Mother, a black Cuban Jew. Father, from New Orleans. Raised in the Jewish tradition, black man, hoodoo worker. And he's in Chicago. He's probably in his 80s now. He's a little older than I am. But he really, really helped me out because he told me you must always, if you're really working the old plantation hoodoo, remember those people did not have a lot of supplies. They kept things down to the bare minimum. You use 1 grain of salt if you can get it. You don't need a whole box full. Our people had little to work with, so you must keep things at a minimum, he taught me. Hoodoo is worked with a minimum of supplies. It is the bare necessity of the tradition. You don't have to do a whole lot of hoopla to get it to work. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to try to locate the ring shout. I mean, you got this dance, this counterclockwise sacred circle. It's done all over the place. It's been written about since the late 1600s, the early 1700s. You find accounts of these Africans forming these counterclockwise circles and marching around in them all over the place. And when Bishop Payne started conducting those conversion ceremonies after emancipation, during Reconstruction and after, he would not allow people to do the ring shout. but they would not be saved if they could not make that counterclockwise sacred ring. And so you have to ask this question, and this is the question I asked. If they wanted to bring, if those slaves, those ex-slaves wanted to bring the ring shout into their Christian conversion experience, what were they bringing it out of? Something sustained it for the 200 years before it moves into the church. Where was it before it moved into the church? We had our own independent religious traditions outside of the Christian church. And Margaret Creel Washington documents it in her book, A Peculiar People. She does a wonderful account in there of the old hush harbors and the old initiation rituals where you went to the stations. And I noticed that the Catholics have the stations of the cross. And when I got initiated to Ogun, I had to go to various stations in the same exact way. That answered some questions for me. It helped me to locate the ring shout as the sacred dance of the old hoodoo religion. And hoodoo at one point was a fully functioning religion for us before we become Christianized. And it is composed of 8 essential elements, which I call the African religion complex. And those 8 elements were counterclockwise sacred circle dancing. All the Africans landed here recognized that. They all practiced ancestor reverence. They all practiced naturopathic medicine. They all practiced water immersion. They all believed in a spiritual cause of illness. And it is out of those 8 common beliefs that they reconstitute a new belief system that I call the African religion complex, which leads us into the old hoodoo religion, complete with its sacred dance, the ring shout. Just because it's short-lived doesn't mean that it didn't function as a fully functioning religion for us, and it did. Or we wouldn't still have the remnants of it around today. I cannot tell you the number of women that have come to me to work some hoodoo for them to get themselves a professional basketball player or a professional football player. I had one woman come to me, and if I were not an honest person, I could have taken her for every penny she had. But I told her that could not be done with hoodoo, and to keep your money in your pocket, she wanted me to work some hoodoo so she could marry Maurice Cheeks. I'm telling you, you'd be surprised at what people ask you to do if they think you can work some roots. Or they think you got some kind of powers. You know, as a Yoruba priest, they say, well, can you kill a chicken for me? You know, make this happen. It's going to take more than a chicken to make it happen.
So tell me what the significance of counterclockwise versus clockwise is.
It's believed that that's the direction that the earth turns on its axis. Counterclockwise.
Okay.
The earth spins counterclockwise. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That's counterclockwise. It's the direction of the spinning of the earth. When you pull that plug out of the bathtub and that water spins counterclockwise, going down into that drain. Because that's the direction that the earth spins. It's the direction of the whirlwind. It's the direction of the tornado. It's the direction of the universe. That's why it's counterclockwise.
I see. And it, of course, it has a direct relationship to nature, and our spiritual practices are always about nature.
Yes, always. And in fact, I came up with a complete new theory of hoodoo. The literature on African traditional religion in the New World generally excludes hoodoo because most folks don't know anything about it. And it's harder to access because it's not practiced openly like Lucumí or Santeria is in Cuba or Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic or any of those places like Haiti. Anyway, I don't want to lose my train. I got 15 things here, paths that I want to go down. Yeah. Okay, so you asked, all right, this is the thing. The traditional literature on African religion says that the Africans were able to disguise their saints or disguise their angels or saints or those intermediary forces as Catholic saints, so that Ogun is disguised as Saint George because Saint George is a knight who slew the lion and he carries a sword, and Ogun carries a big machete. The Virgin of Miercoles becomes Yemonia, And so they disguise their traditional African Orisha as Catholic saints. But because we were enslaved by Protestants, we had no Catholic saints that we could hide our gods in. So now what happens? The theory that I have come up with is that there were two possible directions that those saints could move in. We could move our traditional African gods forward into the Catholic saints to disguise them, or we could move them back into the original sources that they reference. Yemanya references the ocean. Oshun references the river. So we cannot disguise our gods as Oshun, but we can go to the riverside and worship there. And so we have the hoodoo ritual of going to the riverside, pouring down the moon. And I can chart every one of those hoodoo rituals back to a natural process. That's one of them. We moved it back into worshiping the river, and that's that ritual of pouring down the moon. And there are others. Spitting on the broom if somebody sweeps your feet. Because the broom straw comes looking like Obaluaye, the smallpox god. And you must pew him out of your system so he doesn't take hold. So when somebody sweeps your feet, they sweep in the floor and they sweep over your feet, you spit on that broom. You take it back to the original deity and you neutralize it there. You don't allow it to move forward into the saints. You stop it in its tracks and you use it there. And that's what I think we did.
You know,
that's
something?
why we have these rituals of pouring out or running out into the wind with the axe and literally cutting the wind to slow down the tornado, or placing certain things under the bed of a birthing woman. All of that stuff that comes out of nature and gets disguised as saints by the people who practice Santeria. But since we didn't have the saints, what did we do? We went back to the natural source.
Wow. We are almost out of time, Dr. Hazzard. I just want to make sure folks remember the names of the books that you have shared with us today and give them an opportunity to seek them out if they choose to. The first book is Jukin, The Rise of Social Dance Formations in African American Culture. And then the second book, which we've just been discussing, is Mojo Working, The Old African American Hoodoo System. Magnificent. I'm going to have to get those books myself. If folks are interested in obtaining those publications, how can they get them?
Well, they're usually in the bookstores. They're all definitely on Amazon. They're both on Amazon. If they want an autographed copy, they could write me and I could send them one. I have PayPal and all that stuff. So that's if they want an autographed copy, or they could get it off of Amazon, or they could have their bookstore order it, or they could write or call me.
Okay. Well, yeah. We talked about Third Space Action Lab, and you said that you may be coming to Cleveland in June. So hopefully,
yes,
we will see you here, and trustfully, I will have my copy of the book so that you can sign it, and more importantly, I can read it. Anything that you're working on right now that you want to share with us?
Well, I'm working on two pieces. I'm working on one on scat singing, which I have actually finished, which looks at scat singing and its relationship to the ring shout. And I look for the origins of scat singing. And I actually, I think I find it. I think I find it in three separate sources, and they converge when it gets here. That's one. And I'm working on a piece on the emergence of the hand dance, the emergence of, the jitterbug, the Lindy Hop, the hand dance, how it grows out of the old Texas Tommy and the old agricultural routine. And so I'm working on that piece right now.
Okay. I wanted to mention your relationship to Linda Thomas Jones, also known as Mama Fossey,
yes.
who's living her best life in Ghana right now, teaching African drumming. We don't have time for that, so we're definitely going to have you back very soon. And again, as I said at the top of the show, we'll have you on some different platforms as well. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
I surely appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
All right, and maybe we can connect you with Robert Allen as well.
Okay.
All right. As always, if you've been listening, you can check out this show on my YouTube channel. When you get to my channel, which is Vince Robinson on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and share this broadcast with others because I'm sure they will want to know what we talked about today. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your absolute best day. Peace.